pleased to see that this effort has been, and I know it's a huge effort to get these together, and I'm very thankful for it. And thank you for having me on. How did I get started in, or what was my introduction to the tech world or the startup world? I guess just as some context, and I'm sure some of the people on the call may be in the same boat. I'm the oldest child of immigrant parents in America. So I imagine from the conversations that I've had with people who are kind of like myself, our introduction to the cultural zeitgeist of technology and culture, I was very much a late bloomer out of this. And because you're the oldest child, that's the dynamic that you have. But I did not grow up with the typical story of, oh, I was coding at like age 2 or something, like these crazy stories you hear. Like came out of the womb knowing I wanted to code and to build apps and build websites and whatnot. I was tech conscious. I knew there's this Dell computer at home, and I knew of it, and I knew there was these cool, drawing apps and kind of websites that I could visit. But I never even imagined that was something that I would have any involvement in or really know more about than as a typical user. So that was my upbringing. I was tech conscious. I knew of the tools that I liked, but I certainly didn't have anyone around me that was either an entrepreneur or someone who was a developer or a designer or any of these essential roles in kind of the tech world, and had no example of anyone who had, I just had no knowledge of that this was even a career path. This was even something that you could do. And so that was kind of life. And I, grew up in the Midwest, and, around high school and early college, you're thinking, okay, what are you going to do? What am I good at? And two pretty pivotal experiences happened for me where kind of radar blips came up for me. One, I don't know if you guys remember this app, but there's an app called Draw Something. It's still around. It's a game where you can kind of play with someone, guess what they've done. Tawfiq, it looks like I can't see everyone else's faces, but I imagine this is a fairly well-known app. But this was back in 2011, probably 2012. And I was maybe I was an early adopter for it. I was excited about it, and I had just gotten my first iPhone back then. It was like an iPhone 4 or something, which ironically looks like the new iPhone, but that's another subject. But I was a big fan of this app, and it was fun, and it's kind of one of these viral games. And before I know it, I see that it gets sold for like $100-something million. Mm-hmm. And that it was such a news headline thing that I saw, but I was like, whoa, okay, well, this is an app that I really like. Like someone made money off of it. Like it never even crossed my mind that this was something that someone could start and build and like make a lot of money off of it. And so that it came on my radar, and then it kind of fizzled away, and that was that. Probably a year or so later, I start using this other app called Instagram. And at the time, the predecessor to Instagram was Bourbon. Yeah. And at the time, even it was iOS only. People may not remember that, but it was iOS only. And the app was so small at the time that the recommended people to follow were the founders of Instagram. And so I followed the founders of Instagram, and they would post their behind the scenes of running and building Instagram. This was like version 0.8. Like it was very early on in the app. And I liked this app. It was fun. I was just posting nonsense pictures and would follow along the journey of the Instagram founders, Kevin and Mike, and just thought it was awesome. Like they looked like they were like in an attic somewhere and building it, and okay, that's cool. And I was using it, and it was growing and becoming more popular among my friends. And then, a year later, it gets sold for, everyone knows the story of they get sold for, $1 billion. And I'm like, whoa, that's like, I followed this journey. It was before that, I didn't know anyone who had started a company. I didn't know anyone who was in the tech world. It was just these observing people online. I became fascinated with this idea that you can build something and people can use it, and you can like impact people and impact industry this way. So it came on my radar, and I said, okay, I kind of want to do this. Like I love this idea of building something great and having users find it valuable and build something sustainable, be able to hire people and do all this amazing stuff. And so, that was my introduction to the tech world.
Awesome.
It's very online driven. Nobody sat me down and said this was kind of a path you could do. I just observed it online.
Awesome. Awesome.
So
No,
that's kind of the very early stages of how it all started,
it
of
is.
like my introduction to the tech world and how I knew I wanted to go down that path, is observing these great products getting built and a positive outcome coming of it. Those are just kind of two little stories that I have that I remember thinking back were major radar blips on my kind of pivotal years of trying to figure out what I wanted to do.
Absolutely. I think no, that's great to hear. And Hadi, one thing you mentioned that was really interesting, I want to dive deeper into that, is you not having any connections with the tech or entrepreneurial world, or anyone within your family or around that working within that space. My question is, what impact, positive or negative, did that have on your journey, or still has on your journey?
Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest in a mid-sized city called Evansville, Indiana, is where I am now. Is where my parents live, and I'm here staying with them during COVID. But the there's no tech hub here, uh, no major tech company to speak of that's based in anywhere within like 2 hours of here. Our family friends were not tech entrepreneurs or tech investors or developers or QA people or designers. Like, these roles are all new to me in the last 10, 15 years. I
Mhm.
didn't grow up with these roles. I didn't even really know that there was someone who got paid to build Microsoft Word and all these tools that I would use as a child. So at the time when I was in those pivotal kind of high school, early college years, if I'm being honest, I looked at it as I was frustrated about it. Like, I wish someone sat me down and showed me like, you can build this yourself. You can, like, here's a book, an introduction to code that you can, like, when I was in sixth grade, like that would have been, I was always like curious what would have happened if I had like 10-year head start on that. So I was frustrated about it initially.
Yep.
Now, and we can get into kind of how things have played out, but I really see it as a blessing in disguise. You learn to become resourceful. You learn how to, thanks to the internet, you can find, I call it like finding your tribe. You can find resources, you can find stories. As part of those early kind of high school, early college years, I became very fanatical about learning about different entrepreneurs. Anyone who I remotely admired for something that they've done, built, uh, I studied their story. I found every interview that they've given. I would read about it. And so I learned, that was my education into it. Yes, I didn't have a in-person role model who I went to school with or who lived down the street from me who could have taught me these things.
Yeah.
But I found the stories that I needed to find to get inspired, to learn the terminology, to learn the nuances of this world. So it started off me being frustrated that I didn't have access to these things, but you very quickly realize how to overcome that. And it's easier and harder depending on different situations, what your upbringing is and what your, there's a wide spectrum of kind of what that experience would be like, but that's just how it was for me.
Awesome. No, that's great to hear, Adi. So from what I'm hearing, and probably from from an audience perspective, is it was blessing in disguise. It started off as a kind of, you were frustrated, thought it would negatively impact you, that you don't have those, all these skills, those connections, and to be within that circle. But then that pushed you to move out of your comfort zone and go out there and learn the skills, hear the stories of individuals who've built successful stories before you. And I'm sure everyone knows here, online, probably nowadays you can literally learn any skill or hear any story of any successful founder with probably a couple of clicks of a button. Great to hear that, Hadi. I want to shift it a bit to Borsa, because my next questions are probably related to that. Every startup, every entrepreneur has a series of inflection points when they, within their startup or their, entrepreneurial timeline, I would say, if it's more than one startup. Borsa, what were the inflection points? Could you touch a bit on those?
Sure. So in college, I was interested. I was at the time, I was very interested in studying great entrepreneurs and great businesses. And I started investing in the stock market. Very little money, nothing like, probably like $100 or something like that.
Yeah.
But now I'm in the stock market world. I'm learning about companies. I look back and say, if I could have invested in Draw Something, if I could have invested in Instagram, I would have been great. And so now in the public markets, I can say, okay, what are the companies that I like? So I was in college. I really enjoyed finding tweets, analyst reports, news articles, any information about a company to learn more about them, the founder, anything like that. And so in college, I just enjoyed reading these news articles. And long story short, what I consistently saw was that the most valuable part of a news article about a company would be a quote from the quarterly earnings call that may have just happened. Mm-hmm. And that was fine. I kept seeing this reference for earnings calls. And I'm not even, again, same with finance. I didn't have anyone around me who was an investment banker or a money manager or anything like this. So I see this reference over and over again. And I'm like, okay, what is this earnings call? The best part of it, the most interesting part, the most valuable part of this analyst report or this tweet or this news article is the earnings call. Mm-hmm. Which is so funny. Like, people who are in this industry are kind of like, okay, get on with it, kid. But to me, I'm like, okay, I find this earnings call. I like, let me figure out what this thing is. So I figure out what it is. I go to one of the publicly traded companies' websites. I find the URL. It's just a webcast. And I listen to it. And I'm like, oh, great. This is, I'm getting to listen to the interviews that I always, was searching for on YouTube and mostly on YouTube. And now they have this entire hour where the management team is talking about the company. Fantastic. And that went on, and that was fine. Around that same time, it's probably 2013, 14, maybe 15, I was getting into podcasts. Yeah. Really enjoyed listening to podcasts, hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, audio only medium. And it was a form of education for me, entertainment. Like, I was consuming a lot of audio in the form of podcasts. And so the inflection point, to answer your question very specifically, was I was probably sitting on a bus on my way to class at Indiana University, and I'm listening to a podcast in my podcast app, and that's fine. And I'm like, oh, there was an earnings call last night for this company that I want to follow, that I'm interested in. I'm going to go listen to it. I'm on my phone. It's like an iPhone 5 or something. I leave my podcast app, which was a very pleasant user experience, sleek, powerful tools. You can listen at 2x speed. You can download the podcast, get notifications when a new one's available. And then I go to try to listen to these earnings calls. And first of all, again, every single publicly traded company has what's called an investor relations website where they put the links to all this content. Yeah. Now I'm on my phone, on my little Safari browser, trying to find this webcast link. I find it, I listen to it. The user experience was just so dramatically different than what I was just doing in my podcast app. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm starting like late at night, one night, and I'm just, these earnings calls are the company's podcast. It's an hour-long, audio-only little lesson or introduction to what's going on with the company for the past quarter. It's audio only. It's essentially an MP3 file. Why is the user experience, and these mobile websites for these webcasts were never mobile optimized. When you locked your phone or when you go to another app, the audio would stop playing. We all have been there when that has happened. It's just incredibly frustrating. And I said, okay, why can't we apply the user experience of this podcast app? And I was using like the Apple podcast app, nothing like there's even better ones out there like Overcast and that have even a better user experience. Why I wanted to apply the user experience of podcasts over to earnings calls. Very, very selfishly.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even know people listen to earnings calls. I thought they were just like some required thing that people have to do. And so that was really the inflection point of making the analogy of this company content that comes out every quarter should be treated like a podcast. And you can build a user experience around them that mimics that of a podcast app. And that was the prototype. That was the very start of it all. And off I went.
Off you went. Very, very interesting. And I think, I recognize a couple of names in the audience. I know some of them are early stage startup founders and entrepreneurs. I know Borsa currently has, 20,000 users listening to your to earning calls, not podcasts. So 20,000 users, no VC or angel investments. How were you able to achieve that?
So I know what you're getting at, but I wanted to touch on kind of just the way you worded that. So a big part of the mentality out there in startup land is startup investment equals users. Like to get users, you need startup investment, which is true to some degree, but it's not necessary. I kind of see it the other way around. Get the users first, prove that what you're doing is valuable to a cohort of users, prove that there's a market, and then you can get the investment. But that's not a very, there's some other details that I should add there where, yes, we didn't raise money in the form of, giving up equity and, a typical VC angel type deal. But back to your earlier question of the blessing in disguise, being based in the Midwest, AKA not in Austin, SF, LA, or New York.
Yeah.
All these, and whoever on this call is from anywhere other than those places will have seen and observed this behavior. Everyone wants to be the next Silicon Valley. And so what happens is a lot of initiatives get spun up by the local universities, by the local governments, by the local startup hubs or startup kind of meet and greets or networking events. Everyone wants to be the next Silicon Valley. And so they're trying to spur entrepreneurship and encourage entrepreneurship. And it was all very, for me, because I had kind of learned the ropes of entrepreneurship and kind of what it means to build a product online and in school, I would come to these like little gatherings and they would teach you like, step one is like, what's your MVP? And like, they take you through all these like little courses and it's valuable, but it wasn't really applicable to me. But what's amazing is that there would be these grants that would come out or these business competitions that the local universities would host. So to make it more specific about me, about our scenario, the local universities would host these business competitions. Mm-hmm. And the prize money was just a check. No investment, just a check. And that was another inflection point for me that said, and I was fully ready to raise money from friends and family and angels and really go down what I was completely, repeatedly told, as part of your marker of success is building a product, you need to be able to say, you're venture backed, you're angel backed, which is totally fine. And I'm not ruling it out. I get an email every 2 weeks from an angel or VC or a user of our product that says, hey, when you raise your first round, let me know. But these pitch competitions that the local universities would start, I went all in on them. I basically had this Excel sheet, listed them all out,
Okay.
with the amount of money, and there was probably like a dozen of them. Won probably half of them again. I know it sounds awkward to say it, but the competition wasn't very good, if I may say so. So I'm not, we won them fairly easily. If you just had a clear pitch and a concise pitch and a compelling story, you could win these things. And if I total up all the winnings from all these different pitch competition and grants, it was over $40,000, which I know things have changed now, but if you look back 5 years, $40,000 was probably a seed round or a pre-seed or whatever you want to call it for a tech company. So we use that money to build a prototype, get it out there, iterate on it, acquire our first users, all organically, and like put something out there and start building on it and get to a revenue generating product that is self-sustainable and kind of paying for its own development. So that's, I forgot what your original question was, but that's kind of, again, tying it back to this concept of making the most out of your circumstances. Okay. Because I wasn't in these tech hubs across the country or across the world, in Dubai, in Cairo, I know there's a lot of efforts going on there. Because I wasn't there, there were these other opportunities. Yeah. And with less competition. If I was in San Francisco, I would just be one of thousands of people trying to get funding. I would have probably gone the angel route. The business competitions would have probably been extremely competitive, harder to stick out, and our journey would be very different than what ended up happening.
Awesome. Oh, that's really interesting to hear. So I like the part where you said, make use of kind of the opportunities in front of you. I know there's a lot of grants happening, even still in SF, but you said the competition is high there, but there's a lot of grants happening also in the MENA region, and Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Cairo as well. A lot of grants happening there. So just keep an eye on those folks. Hadi, before we open up to the floor, when building a startup, probably my last question, when building a startup, what are some of the good and bad things that you see people do in the beginning? Of course, bringing it to you, what are some of the, things that you would, if you go ahead and repeat this journey, you would do, and then if you repeat it again, you wouldn't do?
Yeah. The first thing that I did was, as soon as I identified this problem and area, I needed, because I didn't have a social media following that I could tweet my link to the app to and get instantly 500 users, 10,000 users to start using it. I didn't have any of that. I didn't have a YouTube following. I didn't have any connections. I didn't have a newsletter that people have now and are able to distribute this. So the first thing that I did was, well, maybe not the first thing, but one of the first things that I did was what I call finding your tribe. The internet's a beautiful place. There's a community for virtually anything out there, just depending on how big it is. So I found my community. I found the finance Twitter. I found the finance social media apps where everyone there knows the problem, has experienced the problem that I am solving for. And I became, I wedged myself to be a major part of that community, a voice in that community. So to apply it to specifically to what we do, so earnings calls, these would happen, these would be broadcasted live, news would be made on these earnings calls, whether it's an announcement of an acquisition or stock buyback, whatever it is that they're announcing. What I did was I would tune in, I would listen live to these earnings calls and live tweet what I did, what was being said on the earnings calls on social media. And I became known as the guy around, my Twitter handle's earnings call guy for that reason. I became the go-to guy for earnings calls. I would live tweet earnings calls as they're happening. I would help members of the community find the webcast so they can also listen. People asking what time, I would just be this resource, and I would spend an embarrassing amount of hours every day just writing content, generating content in these communities. And as I had an app to introduce, I would find ways, it would be in my bio. So people say, oh, who's this guy I keep seeing in my feed? They would go to my Twitter bio, they see, or my there's like this website out there that's dedicated to stock discussing stocks and stuff, and they would see me and oh, this guy has an app. And so became known as this person around this space. And so I had an app that solved the problem. And we got each user literally one at a time. You asked how, you said 20,000. It's actually more. It's like over 30,000 now. How did we get those users? The answer to that is one by one. Like, especially in the early days, one by one. Like, Twitter has this amazing tool where you can search for keywords in a tweet. And I would search for anyone talking about an earnings call, and I would reply to them. I would reply to them and say, I would personalize my comment to them and say, hey, I would either respond to a question they have or share my insight, but just started wedging myself into conversations. And that's how we got the users, just one at a time. And the beautiful thing, if you have a great product, is people talk about it. So initially it'd be one person told one person, and that's fine. And it's very frustrating when you're in the early stages, because the growth is just excruciatingly slow and hard and just terrible. But as you grow, the kind of the laws of compounding, if you have 1,000 users and X percentage of them are telling 10 other people, you can see how that gets really big. And then maybe we'll get into it, but when the right person, when the right influencer gets a hold of your app and writes, but do you want me to go into that story, Tawfiq, or how are we on time?
We are a bit tight on time, so
we'll
probably massage it in if someone asks something similar. So
sure. So to summarize it, just you start off very small, you iterate over time, and you get to where you are now.
Amazing, Hadi.
I saw some questions coming in.
Yeah, we have a few questions come in. Everyone who's on the call, feel free to add your question on the chat. What I'll go ahead and do is unmute you. Feel free to turn on your video as well, give you a chance to ask the question directly to Hadi. We have a question here from JHM. I don't know if that's first or last name. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question? If not,
Ahmad has his hand up.
Awesome. Well, let's just answer the question here. A big one, I know.
Read the question. I'll answer.
How I know you got this question on CNBC as well. How does the app generate revenue?
Oh, okay. The first thing is we solved the problem of making it easy to access these earnings calls. We built this library that's kind of like Spotify. The analogy that I use is, imagine if Spotify or Apple Music or any of YouTube, whatever the app you use to listen to music, imagine if that didn't exist. And you had to listen to all this music that you wanted to listen to. You had to visit each individual artist website, right? There was no centralized place where you could listen to it. We applied that to earnings calls. We aggregated all these earnings calls into one library, organized it, structured it, built a really compelling user experience around it. And then now, to answer your question, what we're doing is we offer additional, what we call premium features on top of this library of earnings calls. So listening to earnings calls and accessing them, that's free. To do anything on top of that, if you want to, right now what we have is, if you want to listen live, if you want to get notifications, if you want to download the call for offline listening, if you want to do any of that, that's a premium subscription. That's part of our Borsa premium product. And what we're going to be doing, and what you'll see coming out in the coming months, is additional features, additional premium features that we are layering on top of this content. So research tools, analytics tools, the ability to take notes on a call and export that to your email, the ability to search across your notes and annotate your notes and get transcripts for like written transcripts, and the way we can tie audio and written transcript together. And so there is a huge amount of features that we can layer on top of our app existing today that unlock additional value, that make earnings calls even more valuable. we're also working directly with investor relations departments, so the companies themselves, enabling them to come into the podcast generation, the podcast world. How can they tell their company's story in this new vertical, this new medium of audio? And the value of that really is, when anyone here who listens to a podcast, has a favorite podcast, knows the relationship you have with a host is very intimate. You know their story, you've been listening for a long time. And so that's kind of maybe a summarized answer to that, is we unlock additional value on top of what we already do and charge a premium for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Hadi. We have Ahmed here raising his hand. I will unmute you, Ahmed. And then you can go ahead and ask the question.
Thank you, Tawfiq and Hadi. Absolutely a great event for us, for someone like me who's trying to go to the realm. The question for you.
Ahmed, I think you went back to mute just as you were about to ask the question.
Oh, sorry. So, question for you, Hadi, is your story has shed the light for people like me who never been in that area. So recently, I got involved with a couple of startups, and I tried to navigate the financial path, the learning path, and all is good except one area: developers. So I am a petroleum engineer. I transitioned to clean tech energy kind of side, and now I'm trying to do couple of startups with people who are like me, who have no idea about development or developers. So where do we start? So we started with the people overseas. It's too expensive. We don't know how to code. Now we're thinking of doing a hybrid, maybe learning to code, maybe hiring someone, but everybody we get a quote from is too expensive. So how do we start? How do we navigate this area? Apparently, we don't have a clue where to start. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ahmad. That's I haven't spoken to an entrepreneur in the tech space who has not felt that pain. So you're not, it's a very universal experience. So that's totally fine. You mentioned the people you work with have similar skill sets to you. While that's fantastic for brainstorming and crafting the solution to the problem you're trying to address, you have to add members of your team that have that skill set that you don't have, that nobody else on your team has. Obviously, that's very hard. It was very hard for me. I spent years looking and trying to find developers who would give me a discount, who would work with me. And I've interviewed probably literally over 200 developers, whether it's by email or in person on Skype and Zoom. My answer is, so I can give you some resources. So Upwork is a great tool. Upwork, it's like a freelance. You can write out your job description. You can tell the job seekers how much you're willing to spend, and you can go that route. You can try that. What I did and what ended up happening for me, and of course, again, making the most out of our situation for where I lived in the Midwest. Now, in the Midwest, there are developers. It's not like we're all just farmers here. There are developers here who work remotely for companies, and I happened to find a developer who works for a Silicon Valley company. And, he's like me. He lives here. He wants to have, he wants to be more involved in tech and be involved with kind of the local tech scene. And we met, and I shared with him what we're trying to do and got him to buy into what we were doing. We became good friends. He still works with me till to today. And my scenario was a bit good fortune in that regard, where I was able to meet someone locally who had a full-time job. So he's not sitting there kind of looking to make money. And I was able to, he did me a huge favor and charged me a fraction of what a senior Silicon Valley engineer would, but because he believed in what we were doing and what I was doing. and the idea and that the effort that had gone to. Just very quickly, I know we're tight on time, but the best thing you can do to win over the time and energy and commitment of a developer is to show that you're not just handing them a piece of paper with specs on it and say, hey, go build this. Show them that you've gone the extra effort, show them that you've gone as far as you possibly can without writing a line of code to prove out that what you're building is going to be valuable. And so my thing was, at the very early stages, I had these index cards. I'm not sure how much index cards translate overseas, but I'm sure they have them. But index cards, there's ones where on one side it's lined and the other side is blank. And I took those index cards and flipped them to the blank side and basically drew out the wireframe for our app. I sat there and tested on it, iterated different concepts. I didn't know how to use InVision. I didn't know how to use Sketch. I didn't know how to use any of these, Figma, all these great designer tools. I had no idea how to use them, but I just mocked it up. And Sam, who I work with, the gentleman I'm talking about, he looked at this and said, I can help you. Like, he saw someone who was just pounding his head against the wall, trying to find someone, and he, eventually helped me. So if you can do something like that, where you have someone locally who you can really get them to buy in. Otherwise, fine, there's Upwork, there's Angel List, where you can post job listings and you can specify the amount you're spending. Do anything you can to get the developer excited. Treat a developer like an investor. Get them excited about it. Show them developers want to work on something that's impactful, that's exciting. So you have to get them excited about that. That's you can email me, find me on Twitter. I'm happy to kind of go deeper on those things.
Awesome. That's a great question. I love that part where treat your early developers as your investors. That's definitely a great comment. We have a question here from Hussam. I'll read it out. Earnings is a seasonal business. It happens 4 times a year. How do you think about user engagement between these periods, as presumably user engagement spikes during earnings and then drops? Is that something that is top of mind or not so much given your current focus?
Very astute observation. Sounds like you're well versed in this space. Absolutely, it's true. Now, earnings, we call it earnings season. It doesn't all happen in 1 week. It's probably over the span of a month and a half, 2 months, where you have every company in the world reporting. And so it used to be kind of a spike and seasonal spike. That spike has been flattening out and kind of normalizing across the year or year round. What we're doing I don't actually see that as a problem, first of all. Because we are not a ad-driven business, I don't care how many times our users visit our use our app. I want them to use our app, and when they use our app, that they're getting tremendous amount of value, that then they're paying us the subscription cost for it. So I can care less how many times a user wants to visit it. Obviously, we optimize to make sure our app is a good experience, that they're able to visit multiple times. And we do focus on and trying to make that a good experience, but I don't see that as a crisis. Now, I get what you're saying, and how do you kind of mitigate against that? The answer is very simple. You're going to see us start to go into more content verticals. So we started with earnings calls. We then did investor events, so annual shareholder meetings, industry events. But we're working with some of the best analysts in the world, where they're going to be doing stock analysis as little episodes, as podcast episodes, stock analysis content, earnings summaries, stitching different highlights from different earnings calls into one aggregated content, and actually have what we're kind of thinking about it, the way if you wanted to hear how COVID has impacted airlines, all in one earnings call or one episode, we will be stitching together all the notable comments that were made on the different airline company earnings calls into one message around COVID. And now we have these conversational or these topical or thematical summaries of earnings calls. And so we're providing more and more content that is not just that gives the user more reasons to visit us.
Awesome. Thanks, Hadi. I'll squeeze in, I know we're short on time, but I see two questions that we can massage them into one. Final question: what was the hardest point so far in your journey, and probably how were you able to overcome that hard point?
There's probably like 50 points that would categorize as the hardest. In the early stages. Why do we have to stick to an hour, by the way? Do people like not want it, or are we limited? Like, if we can, I can stay if that's
if you can
what's,
stay, we'll stay. We can hold it up to the hour if we have more questions.
it's I don't know. Like, if we're having a good time, we can certainly stay a little longer, but I'll try to honor that hour. But in the early days, when we are, again, we were getting one user at a time. I was waking up at 6 a.m. to maintain my time zone with the Eastern time zone and live tweet these earnings calls. Let's carry on. I think someone said there was a vote for carrying on, it seems like, but it was just excruciating progress, meaning like we were moving at the time, it felt pretty fast, but when you look back at it, we were really just inching along. But when you're sitting there and it's just so hard when you're just struggling just to get every new user, and it's terrible. Like, there's no glory. It was just a terrible experience. Like, you're literally struggling just to get every user. And what entrepreneurs are very good at doing, and what I'm very good at doing, is any kernel of hope, any kernel of optimism that I could identify that would carry me on to the next phase. And so luckily for us, the reviews and the user feedback have always, from the very, very bare bones prototype that we built, were amazing. And even when our user numbers in the early days didn't warrant us to keep going, for me to keep going, we weren't generating any revenue, I just knew from the user feedback that we are onto something. Like, it wasn't just like a thumbs up. It was like people writing me essays like, hey, I've been a Wall Street analyst for 15, 20 years, and I like, this is part of my day-to-day. A New York Times reporter, one of the most famous New York Times reporters, he tweets me and says, I'm so thankful this exists. You get these interactions, you get this feedback that give you hope, that say, okay, you get re-energized. It's kind of like our fuel for it. And so in the early days, it was really hard. And then as you grow, again, what I was saying earlier, we had this event where, we would get word of mouth, and then it takes one person with a large following to give you a shot. And so I get a call, and for anyone here who watches CNBC, you may be familiar with a gentleman by the name of Josh Brown. And I get a call from him. I get a call from him, and and he's asking very much the same questions that you're asking, Tawfiq, just like, how did it start? What's going on? And he goes on, and he has one of the largest financial blogs in the world. He's been doing it for many, many years. He has this platform on CNBC. He publishes a blog where it's an incredibly long blog where he is pitching our service. He's such a fan of it. He titles the blog post the best investing app on earth. And that goes viral in the finance space. We get a lot of users. 2 weeks later, I get a DM, a Twitter DM from a CNBC producer. And I'm like, this is fake, whatever. It's real. He's like, and this is late on a Friday night. And he says, can you join Kelly Evans on Monday to talk about Borsa? And after I validate that this is not one of my friends scamming me or whatever, I say yes. My whole weekend gets ruined. I'm just like fanatically focused on like trying to prepare for this interview. And we go on to do 4-minute. Essentially, we did a 4-minute commercial on CNBC all around the world, which was amazing because my family in Syria got to watch me live on TV. It was a whole thing, and I was very happy about it, which led to a huge spike in users, which led to news articles, which led to my appearance on different finance podcasts. And so it's just amazing. Like, I think as a percentage, we were growing very small in the early days, but it takes one event to kind of a snowball effect. And now, we're on our way to 100,000 and a million users. So
awesome. Well, really, really great timing for that, because I think the next question comes on kind of a bit on top of that. By the way, everyone here, this was supposed to be a 45-minute chat, but we're opening up to the hour. Great to see everyone excited to be having this conversation with Hadi. Ziad here asks, who's your target customers, retail investors or institutions? And what is your next go-to-market strategy?
Retail investors, the answer is all the above.
Yeah.
We have retail investors, analysts, reporters, money managers. We have people managing billions of state pension funds using our service to keep on top of the companies that they care about. We have a grandma who uses her app to check in with her GM stock every quarter. It's a huge spectrum, where our biggest area of growth are the professional users, because as we add more professional tools and services on top of them, unlocking more value for them, they're using our app as a more habitually. Our next go-to-market is working with the companies themselves. So if we can actually get the company earnings call, the IR representative on the earnings call to actually say, hey, to listen to this earnings call, use the Borsa app, that's going to unlock a huge audience for us. But we're still very early stage in our user growth, and we have not by any means tapped out on the growth in the cohorts that we are currently in. But we're having conversations, trying to figure out partnerships and ways to get our brand out there. But so far it's word of mouth, appearances like this, and again, one user at a time. But of course, you have to do things that scale better over time.
Amazing. It seems like we're out of questions. I'll kick in here with the final question. What are the key takeaways you want the audience on this call? If it's a couple of things that you want them to take away from this, what are those?
I think it's important. I shared my story, but everyone's scenario is very different. I'm very fortunate to live in a country that is not war torn, like how most of my cousins live. I'm fortunate to live in where I have easy access to the internet, where I have easy access to certain institutions and events that I'm able to access. I have good health. I don't have certain life circumstances that really prevent people from being able to pursue something like an idea and build it. So I think it's important, first of all, to frame that and that it's not always possible to do these things, to wake up every day at 6 a.m. to live tweet and get those early users. So I kind of want to frame that as something that's, I feel like, is necessary to say. But a takeaway is, if you have a problem that you're very fanatical about solving, I guarantee there's a hack. There's some arbitrage that can be had for how to get those early users and prove that the problem that you're solving for is in fact a problem that enough other people have. So I would say focus on your problem, find your tribe, find a community online or in person that experiences the same problem, get involved in that community, understand the core essence of the problem, understand how your solution will be adopted by these users. And as you build something that is getting traction and providing value, you'll notice that people will gravitate towards that and people will reach out and want to help. But the first step is getting out there.
Amazing. Well, that is it, Hadi. Thank you very much. Before closing here, where can people connect with you, follow you? I know you're on Twitter, earning calls, guys. Maybe it'll be useful to share. Where can people connect with you with any follow-up questions or any opportunities?
My DMs are open on Twitter, earnings call guy. My email is hadi@borsahq.com. LinkedIn, just my full name. If you know Tawfiq, he'll connect you with us. I'm easy to find, so happy to get to know the people on this call.
Awesome. Well, Hadi, thank you very much. And And the audience, thank you very much for joining in. I also just put on the chat here our TechWadi's social media handles, our websites if you want to learn more. We're continuously doing these webinars and fireside chats with amazing individuals like Hadi Yousef to support really high-tech entrepreneurship between Silicon Valley and the MENA region. I would say the US and the MENA region for Hadi's case here. But Hadi, thank you very much. The audience, thank you very much. Hope you enjoy this, and we will see you soon. Amazing. Bye.